75% of people will experience a traumatic event in their lifetime. And if you haven't experienced such an event in your life, it means your chances are probably much higher than that. Because, for example, me, I'm halfway through my life, and I've already experienced several traumatic events, which include cancer, war, and depression, so physical illness. And I don't include natural stressful events like death of the family members and stuff like that. Those are the part of the course. So what is trauma and how can we make ourselves stronger when we are dealing with it? Let's talk about that. And before we begin, I want to give you an example. This morning, I got a notification email. There was an article on Quora about a woman who died during childbirth. And of course, it's an emotional story where, the doctors cried. It's so sad. And they show a picture of a child next to his dead mother. And when you look at these kinds of pictures, what do you feel? What do you think? Because depending on what you feel and what you think, you will be either stronger when it comes to traumatic events in your life, or you will be weaker. You will not be able to deal with these kinds of events. So now, by looking at your reaction, we can already predict your reaction to a traumatic event in your life. And so we will talk about this a little later. But for now, let's talk about why we have trauma, why we might have PTSD. According to Stephen Joseph, PhD, who wrote a book, What Doesn't Kill Us, PTSD and post-traumatic stress, so D stands for disorder, but more people experience stress, post-traumatic stress, that doesn't reach the level of a disorder. Of course, it's natural to experience post-traumatic stress. And so I've experienced it, probably you've experienced it, but not everybody gets to the level of the disorder. In fact, only 8 to 12% of people will be traumatized to the level where it reaches the PTSD level. And 20 to 25% of people will have PTSD as a result of an extreme trauma. Think about, let's say, rape and murder, captivity, that kind of stuff. Not losing your job, not divorce, not such, soft things, so to speak. But then again, for some people, divorce, for example, can be a traumatic event. So I'm not, dissing those people. The fact is, different people will have traumatic reactions to different events. So whatever might be, softcore for me, like I've experienced divorce with very little trauma and very little stress. Okay, comparing to other things in my life, that was little. It felt heavy and difficult at the moment, but now looking back, that was by far not the heaviest thing I've ever experienced. For example, let's say war, where my parents were stuck in Ukraine, that was much more difficult than divorce. My son's cancer is by far the most difficult experience I've had. So everything kind of pales in comparison to that. So for some people, a divorce might be a traumatic event when, let's say, their spouse is leaving them. And I watched a video by David Goggins when he was speaking on stage, and then he was asked a question by a member of the audience, a man, and he says, "My wife left me, what should I do?" In my case, I'd be like, why are you even asking that question? Isn't it obvious? This is not a big deal, at least in my case. I wouldn't be worried about it all that much. But then again, the Goggins, his response was like, just accept it, basically. And the man was like, yeah, okay, I will accept it. But you see, so for some people, one event can be traumatic. For others, it's not traumatic at all. So why do we have this post-traumatic stress? And Stephen Joseph, in his book, What Doesn't Kill Us, he basically proposes this idea that this is an evolutionary adaptation. About 98% of our human history has been spent in hunter-gatherer environments. So modern human life is a very recent development. And so in hunter-gatherer environments where we were basically defenseless against other animals, diseases, accidents, there was no medical care, there was nothing. And so in those environments, it was really useful to experience some sort of stress after a traumatic event. Let's say you were attacked by an animal. So then if you don't learn from that experience, then how are you gonna survive the next attack? You will be more prone to experiencing the next attack and the next and the next. And so at some point you will be dead. And so you will not leave any offspring. Basically, people who didn't experience post-traumatic stress died out. That's the conclusion. That's how evolution works, right? It means that this is a useful mechanism in our brain that helps us survive. And just by knowing that, you can A, be more open to experiencing events in your life. And if you are more open to that, then you will be stronger. Like I saw that article on Quora about the mother who died in childbirth. And as a parent of a child who almost died, I am more sensitive now after that experience to these kinds of stories that show the parent-child relationship and the tragic side of these kinds of experiences. And because I am open to this, so when I saw that article, I took the time to think about it, to think about the situation, to imagine how I would react in that situation. And so by taking the time, you kind of inoculate yourself when things actually happen to you. And so this is why I say that depending on your reaction to these kinds of information pieces, I can predict what your reaction will be to actual trauma. So post-traumatic stress, disorder or otherwise, is actually useful for your life to process events, right? And in fact, did you know that most people who have reached the level of PTSD, not just post-traumatic stress, but most people actually resolve their stress within 6 to 12 months. So you can expect that you will suffer for some time after the traumatic event, but then within a year, most people actually resolve their stress. And then even if they don't, out of that minority, then 50% of people can be helped by therapy. In fact, a very small amount of people end up having long-term PTSD. So now we have this question. Okay, so if the majority of people actually resolve, they deal with trauma naturally, automatically, even without help, so what happens after that? And what happens is what's called post-traumatic growth. In his book, What Doesn't Kill Us, Stephen Joseph, PhD, mentions that you can think of trauma as shattering of the vase. So let's say you have a vase somewhere in your house, and it's a beautiful vase, and you appreciate it a lot. And then one day, this vase gets broken. So there are two options. Number one, let's say it falls down and it's slightly damaged. In that case, you can just use glue and put this piece back into the vase, and it looks just fine. You can still see the glue, but it's fine. Mostly it's okay. But what happens when the vase is shattered completely? So then different people, they have different approaches. And some people will try to put this vase back together the way it was, but other people will try to, it's called accommodate. Basically, they will try to make something new. They will accept the fact that the vase as a whole entity is gone. It's not there anymore. Now it's just a pile of shards. So then they will try to make something new. They will try to use the leftovers of this vase and create something new. So when we apply this principle to actual traumatic events, what this shattering means is this is the shattering of your assumptive world. What is assumptive world? Assumptive world is a set of your beliefs about how the world is. It's your image in your mind of how the world is. For example, one of the classic examples is kids who believe in Santa. So in the kids' world, there is Santa, and they don't even doubt the reality of it. They think, okay, if I do a good job, then I get a present. If I'm naughty, then I don't get presents. So that's how we adults function as well. Just we have different sets of beliefs. We have much wider sets of beliefs, right? And so when a traumatic event happens, it breaks our beliefs. For example, there are three main categories of beliefs. Number one is the world is benevolent. The world is good, the world is kind, the world is wonderful. The fact is, no, it's not. The world is as it is. It has good sides, it has bad sides. But if you think that the world is a good place, you will get traumatized much more severely than anybody else. So for example, I remember when I was a teenager and I got the access to the internet for the first time, I remember finding a video of Russian soldiers being beheaded while being alive with a knife by Chechen fighters. So there was a Chechen war where Russia was trying to capture Chechnya, and defenders of Chechnya were actually filming how they would treat Russian soldiers so as to scare them not to come there. And so I watched that video and I was like, oh my God, the world is messed up. That was my conclusion. And I think for a really long time, that memory was actually stuck within my mind. It was slightly traumatic. It wasn't an experience per se, but that video changed how I see the world. And it kind of put many things into perspective, actually. For example, if I had some problem at school, I would be like, at least nobody is trying to kill me. Or if somebody died, I would be like, at least they died peacefully. And so, you see, one traumatic event can actually make you more resilient to other traumatic events. So let's say, again, if you have this image of the world as both good and terrible place, then number one, you appreciate the good much more than otherwise. If you think, oh, the world is amazing, and then somebody does something good to you, you're like, yeah, that's usual. Okay. But then if you know that the world is horrible and it can be good, in that case you will be like, oh wow, good things happened to me. Bad things didn't happen to me. This is amazing. And many people actually report positive changes as a result of trauma. For example, many people say that they've gained appreciation of life, they've gained better relationships, and many other reasons why they feel better now after traumatic events. So that was the first belief. The world is a good place. Well, it's not. It's not good, it's not bad, it's both. And you have to work hard to move yourself out of the bad place in the world to the good place. Next. The next belief is that the world is predictable and just. And again, how wrong is that? And if you think that, so here's the thing. I believe that, I had this belief, but it was very weak in my mind. So for example, like in the case with Russian soldiers being beheaded, you could actually argue that that is just. That is predictable, If you come with war to another country, that's what you get. And so one of ways to process trauma is actually develop internal rules for the world. So then traumatic events actually serve the purpose of preventing future trauma happening to us. So for example, like in my case, I would be like, hell no, I'm not gonna invade any other country. Like to me, that would be like the rule in my life, not to invade other people's countries. So on one hand, you could process trauma and traumatic events and experiences and information using your current beliefs. Like, let's say the world is predictable. Well, yeah, if you invade another country, you will die. Okay. But in some cases, things happen like accidents. We call certain events accidents. Why? It's because it's just a random, unpredictable event, and that is a bad event. And accidents happen, and you can't deny that. The world is actually not predictable. The world is not just. Bad things happen to good people. And again, Quora is sending me these weird articles, but again, I saw an article the other day about a very handsome man with a very beautiful family who look happy, who look well off, and he's dead because of cancer. He wasn't old, he was like middle-aged, and he had cancer and he died. And you would think, wait a second, how is that possible? He's well off, he's handsome, he probably has a good job, and yet he's dead. Why? It's because the world is not just. And in my case, the most difficult challenge to this belief was my son's cancer. Because in my mind, I always thought that if you smoke, you get cancer. If you work at a nuclear power station, you get cancer. If you drink a lot, well, you get cancer. But then nothing can prepare you for your 2-year-old child getting cancer. It's like, what the hell has he done in his life to deserve this? Nothing. It's random. Life is not fair. The world is not fair. And when you accept that, it actually makes it easier. You are not bound by these constraints of thinking about, oh, this is fair, this is not fair. The world is not fair. The world is as it is. But humans put these labels because this is part of our culture. We want to organize our society based on something. But the world doesn't have that. This is human world. We have this culture, and then we apply these values and these principles to the world as a whole, which is not true, which doesn't actually work in real life. So that's the second belief. The third belief is we are decent, good people. Again, good things and bad things. And when bad things happen, you're like, wait a second, I'm a good person. Why did this happen? Imagine if something, let's say, bad happens, and then you don't do something, then you're like, oh my God, I'm guilty. Why did you, like, this is the survivor's guilt. You know that. Like, if you're a good person, how come you let somebody die, for example? Or how come you didn't do something that could have prevented? Does it mean that you are a bad person? No, it doesn't. It just means that you are you. You're not good, you're not bad, you are just you. And you are in this environment like a drop in the ocean, and that's it. And so here's the thing. If you can break these beliefs before a traumatic event happens, then you will be much stronger. And actually, like about the good people, when my son had cancer, he had eye cancer. And when I found out that he would lose his eye, that was a really difficult thing to accept. Because in my mind, it was, you know this saying, mens sana in corpore sana? In Latin, it means healthy spirit in the healthy body. And so, of course, now my son is obviously not healthy. So then does it mean that he will be a bad person? Or he will be a mentally sick person? And then I also wondered, like, how will I think about him? Because before the cancer diagnosis, I really loved him. And I was like, oh my God, you are an amazing human being. And of course, maybe it was just my hormones, like, you know, made me love him, but it doesn't matter. But then he gets sick and he loses his eye. And so now physically, you can look at, like a child, imagine a child with one eye only. I think all humans, if we are honest, we would be like, that's not beautiful, that's ugly. If we are honest. Again, if you forget this stupid idea that you are a good person, just be honest. If you see somebody with one eye, will never say that they are beautiful. And so in my case, I had this strong conflict between, on one side, this is my child. And now I need to build my life with my child, who I think is originally not beautiful anymore. And then how I solved this problem is by asking myself, okay, will you love him less? And the answer was no. I wouldn't love him less. One eye, two eyes, doesn't fucking matter. It's like, he is a human, he is my child, I love him no matter what. And then I also thought that, you know what, now if I can frame it for him in the way that will make him not regret it, not feel sorry about himself, but if I frame it from the point of view as this is a battle scar. If he were, you know, if this was a girl, then I could see that would not work, because girls are not supposed to have scars. But in case of men, you know, you lost your eye, battling the deadly disease, and you won. Like, dude, you're a hero. It's like, what's his name? Alexander the Great. So his father, Philip of Macedon, he lost his eye. He was injured in his eye in battle, and then he removed his eye. That dude looks so badass with one eye. Like, if you've ever seen his, you know, statues or pictures or whatever, he looks cool. He looks like a real man. And so that's my point, that I just reframed this event from a negative to the positive. So on one side it was, okay, number one, I don't give a damn if he has one eye because I love him anyway. And so if I don't love him any less, then why should I worry? Like, for me, my love for him was more important than this kind of beauty, the sense of beauty. And in my case, like, I appreciate beauty a lot in life, and that's one of my strong points. So then, of course, I was sensitive to that. So that was one point, that my love for him is more important to me than his looks. And then number two was that, yes, now he might look not as appealing, but now he looks cool. Because I just think that if somebody is okay with having an injury, that's immensely cool, especially for men. It's like, do you know that in Prussia, they would start these kind of fencing matches? I don't know how to properly call it. It was called duels, but they were not real duels. They would just kind of fence, and then scratch each other and create these scars. And that was manly. Like, if you didn't have a scar, you had a baby face. If you had a scar, you were like badass, real man. So you see, you can actually process these emotions and these, beliefs, if you are more honest. If you forget about your ideas of, okay, handsome people are, healthy, or if you're handsome, then you're good, or you are good, or all of that is just nonsense. It doesn't exist. And so when you ditch that, then you will be more resilient, because you will be more open to all kinds of events, because then you will be like, okay, that happened. That's what happens. So a lot of the trauma is actually the shattering of your beliefs. And then, because you don't need to experience trauma to then disassemble and maybe break your own beliefs. So if you can do that without a traumatic event, then later you will be more resilient to those events. And I remember thinking about this. I actually had prepared myself without knowing it to prepare for my son's cancer. I remember reading a history book, and I remember reading a biography of one of authors or somebody, and his family had, I think, 10 children. Yeah, 10 or even more, 15, something like crazy amount. But only 3 of them actually survived to adulthood. And there was 1 year when 5 kids died in 1 year. I think most of people would just ignore this fact, but I took a moment, I stopped for a second, and I imagined how it would be for the parents when they lose 5 kids in 1 year. I can't imagine it. I mean, of course I can, because I imagine that not only they lost, but everybody else around them. So then it didn't shatter their worldview maybe as much. And so they, at that time, it was 19th century, at that time it was not uncommon, and that's why people had, let's say, 15 kids, because if you have 3 and all of them die, then that's it, that's your family's finished. It was not crazy for them to experience this kind of event, but when I was reading, I was like, oh my God, the world can be, was terrible and tragic place. And so I think that by exposing myself to these kinds of pieces of information and processing them, I was able to make myself a little more resilient when the actual trauma happened. When I found out that my son had cancer, as I told you before, there was a time when there were 2 options. Option number 1, the cancer hadn't spread outside of the eye. In that case, he would lose his eye, and that would be the end of it. Unless, of course, it's double, there are 2 types of eye cancer. One is that happens randomly, and another one is that happens genetically. The one that happens genetically basically guarantees that this cancer will happen in the other eye as well. And so in that case, the child becomes blind if this cancer is not caught immediately. Or basically, that's a difficult life. Let's put it that way, okay? So in my case, we didn't know that. And if the cancer had spread outside of the eye, this is a very fast-growing, very aggressive type of cancer that almost guaranteed that my son would die within a year or half a year. and that his short life would be very painful. And so when I didn't know that, that's when I needed that memory about 5 dead kids in 1 year. I knew that this is not, that this is not me. When you know that it doesn't happen only to you, it doesn't happen only now, it just changes, it makes you stronger. And so this is one of those things that you can do right now to make yourself stronger for the future. Yes, but here's the thing. According to Stephen Joseph, again, the same book I'm referring to, What Doesn't Kill Us, there is a sweet spot when you can actually process trauma. So post-traumatic stress then often leads to post-traumatic growth. And this is what I learned way. When I was struggling with my son's cancer, one part of the time that I was spending was on educating myself. Because as I mentioned before, to solve problems, including the psychological problems, you need skills, information, materials, and tools, right? And so I needed to educate myself on what could happen, what would happen. And so I guess this is my need for stability and sense of control, maybe predictability. So this helps me function. So if this helps me function, instead of going into the shutdown or denial mode, I am able to think clearly because I have this way of operating. So I think about possible outcomes, like I told you before that, okay, if this is only in one eye, then it's this case. If the cancer hadn't spread, it's this case. If the cancer spread, it's this case. And so I can prepare for different situations, and I can also think ahead of time what activities and what actions I need or can take. So this is the same that you can do when you have stressful situations. But here's the thing. The growth only happens within a sweet spot. What do I mean by that? It means that not enough stress, if this event is not traumatic enough, it will not cause post-traumatic growth. It will not cause trauma. But then at the same time, if you have too much stress, if this event was too traumatic for you, then again, it will not allow you to process it because it will be just too much for you to deal with. And so in my case, what I did to deal with my stressful situation when my son had cancer, I wrote down the events of the day. So every day I would sit down and I would write down 2 sections. Section number 1, what happened, the facts. Let's say we went to hospital, we did MRI, the doctor said this. We are going to do that tomorrow, okay? So that was the facts. And then the second part was how I felt about it. So usually I think the first part was shorter and the second part was longer. But here's the thing. This is very useful. As I was reading this book, What Doesn't Kill Us, I realized that somehow, naturally, I found one of the probably best ways to deal with traumatic and stressful events by journaling. And I hate this journaling word, but anyway, captain's log. I call it captain's log. Okay, writing your log. Because one of reasons why people develop PTSD is because they have certain memories that physically can't be processed. And because these memories can't be processed, then they stay in the memory for a really long time. It can stay for years unless you process them. And for me, the way to process was basically write them down, express how I feel, so put labels, and then when you put labels, then you can deal with it, okay? So I remember writing, like, I was struggling with these emotions, as I mentioned, with my beliefs being shattered, like, why is this happening to him? Such a happy, cheerful 2-year-old boy who did not commit any crime, any bad thing in his life. So, this is not just. And so I remember fighting with these thoughts, and I would just write them down. And then by writing, you give yourself chance to label, and second, process these emotions. And so in doing that, I managed to kind of resolve a lot of these issues and rebuild my new beliefs. And this is the key of transformation when you deal with trauma, that you have basically 2 ways out. One is post-traumatic growth, and another one is stress disorder, if you can't deal with that experience. And so when you know that there is another way, which is more common. As I mentioned, the majority of people can experience and do experience post-traumatic growth after trauma, right? Why wouldn't you follow that way? If you know what to do, then just do it. You had trauma, yes, it was painful, but now what are you gonna do? Now you need to deal with things. But here's the one interesting point that I think even people with no trauma can benefit from. When you are more able to deal with traumatic events, what happens is you become more brave. And so you become more open to, especially for men, I believe. Like for me, women, I'm not sure if that's a benefit, but for men, we are more open to challenges, because I think a lot of times what stops us is our fear of failure. And if you have experienced a traumatic event, or if you develop the skills to deal with a traumatic event, you are more likely to then expose yourself to difficult life situations. And we all know that easy life will not bring any benefits. It doesn't mean that you need to challenge yourself with everything all the time. No. But what I mean is that sometimes you have to do the hard thing and be open to failure if you really want to change your life, especially if you want to change your life. If you want it to continue as it is now, whatever. Don't change anything, everything is good. But if you want to change, then you have to do something hard. You have to do something extraordinary. You have to challenge your beliefs and you have to take action, right? But if you're afraid to take action, if you're afraid to fail, then you're not going to do it. It means you're not going to change your life. And so what I've seen in my life, for example, for many years, I had wanted to start my language school or any kind of school. I remember writing my long-term goals when I was like 20 years old. And one of those goals was to start my school. And only after my son, and 2020 was a hellish year for me. In 1 year, I lost 2 jobs. So I had 2 jobs. I lost both of them. My son had cancer. Then I was forced to basically do something because, I have no job anymore. Now my son needs extra money every year to, let's say, change his prosthetic eye. And so, now I have to do something. And so I know many men would just like break down, start drinking, commit suicide. I don't know what. But in my case, I was like, yeah, okay. I don't give a damn. My son's cancer, that was the hardest thing ever. And everything else, losing a job, losing both jobs, was like, yeah, I don't care. So what? Like, it's not the worst thing that can happen. Yeah, it's bad. But then I was able to then look at this from that perspective of how bad it could be. Then I started my school. I just took the chance. I started because I knew that it would not be worse than what I've had already experienced. And so in my case, I started a school, and then very soon, I think 1 week into the actual new school, my partner decided to leave. And I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. But then again, I was like, is it that horrible? Nobody's gonna die if she leaves. So yeah, whatever. So that made me stronger. And again, you don't need to experience a traumatic event to become stronger. You can, inoculate yourself from any possible traumatic events in the future. And then another way is just by destroying your limiting or wrong beliefs, as I mentioned, the 3, then you can just do the hard thing because now you're not afraid anymore. Okay? So 2 options. By doing these things that I mentioned, you become stronger if and when bad things happen to you, and you become stronger when you want to change your life. But when you live your life every day, you just become stronger. If you don't get overwhelmed with stress, like in my case, when my son had cancer, when I realized it, so I was the first one to realize it. I looked in his eye, I see something white. I'm like, what is that? I still remember this moment as if it happened like yesterday. It was the evening. We went to the park, then we come home. He's getting ready to eat dinner. I prepare dinner for him. He sits at the table, and then he looks up. I'm like, why is there something white inside of your eye? And I'm like, yeah, okay, doesn't matter. I give him food. He starts eating. I take my phone, because then I I was like, this is not okay. This is not how it's supposed to be. And so at that time, I could choose to be in denial. I could choose to ignore it, but I didn't. I was open to something being wrong, something being bad. And so when you destroy your limiting beliefs, your wrong beliefs, then you will become more alert and more in sync with the world. You will be more open to what is actually happening in the world. And so that's how I was able to quickly react. I look at my phone, 2 possible cases, cataract or cancer. Cataract is very unlikely, cancer is very likely, and oh my God, that was really stressful. But anyway, and my wife was in the shower, and she gets out. I'm like, we have to take him to the hospital. We can't wait. So then we call the ambulance. I think they tell us, no, this is not an emergency. We are like, okay, so what do we do? Then we go to a hospital by ourselves, and then in the hospital they give him drops, the eye drops. And so this is the key. It's almost impossible to see this cancer when it's in early stages. And only in early stages you can save the life. And so I think I was maybe lucky that my son looked up and the light fell, in the inside of his eye. And yeah, basically that's how it happened. And so then we go to the hospital, they give him drops that open the eye, and then it was so clear, it was so big and so white. And the doctor was like, oh my God. And so we go to hospital in 2 days because it was Saturday. On Saturday, no hospitals work here in Yokohama. And so on Monday, we have a booking. In the morning, we go there, and our terrible journey starts. Anyway, so if I were not prepared, maybe I would not be able to do that. Maybe my son would be dead now, and I would not be talking to you. So that's it. I hope everything is good with you. If it is, then I'm happy for you. But get ready.